Hey guys, Jossa here. Now, as you guys all know, there's going to be a few removed gold orders. So, here's, the Berdan, the Gewehr 1888, the Pedersen Rifle, and the, and I think it was the Schmeisser. So, in this video, I'm actually going to do something a little bit unique. I'm going to go through every single gold order in one video, and basically kind of rank them in, basically, I'm going to explain where they're from, which campaign they're from, and more or less to say where they're good. I just put the button here. Where they're good, and basically, if I would recommend them. Now, the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to rate it out of in 3 different criteria. The first criteria is effectiveness. How effective they are in each, really how effective they are. So, for example, something like the, say, for example, the PPD here is quite effective because it's a drum mag PPD. Now, I'll be judging this pretty much above as like an overall across the campaign. So, if something is really good in the early stage of the campaign, then I won't be including it on this list. The second thing I will mention is more or less just how viable it is. So, I've already said, I was going to say, so how effective it is in combat will basically mean like how good it is. This is how, more or less, if it's useful to replace something in the territory. For example, the BSA Thompson, for example, is it viable over, say, the Sten, for example, or later versions? For example, we'll be using that as an example, or something like the G43 Kurz over the FG, etc. And the final part is how fun the weapon is to use. Now, and that's basically just more or less how funny it is to use, how fun it is to use, how effective it is, etc. Now, another rule I'm going to make is that I'm going to be, as I'm going through everything, some of these are in multiple campaigns. Pretty much all of these, with the exception of the Mosin Sniper and the Berdan, for example, for the Soviets, are in most other Soviet campaigns. So I'm only going to use one for each campaign. However, I'm not going to go like, oh, this is only effective in this campaign. I will explain both campaigns, and with the effectiveness ranking, I'm going to be judging it on both campaigns, basically. And also, more or less saying, like, oh, for example, with the, saying, hey, this, if this weapon is useful in one campaign, but not as useful in another, it'll be like, for example, say, let's use, I don't know, the Pedersen Rifle, for example. The Pedersen Rifle isn't that good in Normandy, but it's actually very overpowered in Tunisia. So, for Tunisia, it'll probably have, like, a 5 in, like, effectiveness, it'll probably have a 5 in, like, the, variety sake, but in the effectiveness sake and stuff like that. But in Normandy, it'll be a lot less. So it'll be 2 rankings in a way for the same weapon. It'll make sense the more go in the video. Anyways, that being said, let's start. We'll be starting with Moscow allies and working our way. And also it means I don't have to touch Stalingrad, because Stalingrad's ones are used in both Berlin and Moscow. Anyways, let's start with Moscow. Starting off, we've got the meme machine itself, the Berdan. Now, the Berdan is basically the biggest meme in the in the game, and honestly, yeah, let's just talk about it. In terms of effectiveness, it's a 0. Okay, it's a musket basically. Now I know it's technically not a musket, but it's easy to call it a musket. So it is a rifle, but it's basically a musket. But, yeah. So, it's not effective. Everything's better than the Berdan. It does have great hit power and hits like a freight train. However, it's not effective. Is it viable? No. Again, as crap as Moscow Soviets' bolt actions are, even they are not as bad as something like the Berdan. The Berdan just has a lot. But, when it comes to just how much enjoyment you get out of it, honestly, this one's it's quite enjoyable. It is actually, I can understand why people would get this. It's enjoyable to use. Like, it's kind of like the Nagant revolver. yeah, it's god-awful. But it's fun to use. Like, it's fun to use. And, yeah. Which is probably, it's one of the funny things about the Berdan. Anyways, as you know, it's going to be gone soon. So if you want to use this, grab it as soon as you can. Anyways, let's move on to the next gold order. Next gold order is actually the PDM. Now, the PDM is a submachine gun, which is in both Moscow and Berlin. So, in terms of just, well, basically, let's just start off. In terms of effectiveness, it's effective. It's a Soviet it's a Soviet SMG at the end of the day, and it's very effective. I would probably say it's a 3 because of its smaller magazine size. So it's going to be like a similar in strength to something like like the PPD 3438 and the PPS 42 and the PPS 43. Solid options, but there's better SMGs in the game. In terms of viability, this one's going to be really depends on the campaign. Now, for Moscow, not so much, I think. It's unfortunately it's going to be if you buy it almost immediately upon getting Moscow, then yeah, it's fine. It'll be an upgrade to what you've got. But as soon as you get the PPD 34-38 with the 71 drum, this thing gets obsolete, and it's more obsolete in it's even more obsolete in Berlin, where this thing just does not hold a candle to like the PPS 42 is just so good as a starting SMG that really I'm gonna have to give it a 1 or 2, maybe 1.5 actually in effectiveness, because it's effective in the early game in Moscow, but not that much. But in Berlin, a 0 out of 5. As for enjoyment, probably best to have it as a maybe more of a maybe more like a 3 again, probably balanced in the middle. It's kind of more like in the middle in terms of the SMGs. I mean, it's an SMG at the end of the day. It's a Soviet SMG, but the Soviets dominate with SMGs, which is probably the PDM's problem. And there's another issue that also comes into play, which is the fact that it's with the viability, which I'll explain later. Anyways, let's move on to the next gold order. Coming in next, we got the RMN. Now, the RMN is a handheld mortar. This is one of the most unique ones because you can use it as either a primary or a secondary weapon for multiple classes. Almost every other gold order is used by 1 or 2 classes. The RMN, on the other hand, you can use this for either regular troopers or bombers, really, and that's really it. In terms of effectiveness, I'm gonna give it a 3 again. It's the same with the PDM. It's fine. It's fine at what it does. It's basically a good way to clear a point, but the problem is it's very situational. In terms of usability, in terms of viability, on all the campaigns it's on, because it's on Berlin and Moscow, I'm going to give it a 3 again. Again, it's very situational. And honestly, it's not the best in terms of like how much the situations do. It's not as strong good with situations, but it is fun to use, which is when we talk about how fun it is to use. I'm gonna give it a 4. It's not as fun as something like as other weapons, but it's still pretty fun to use. I would say though the only problem is it can be a bit aggravating to use when you don't get the correct moment, and yeah, which is why it's coming in only at it's only going to get the number 4 and a 4 out of 5 instead of a standard 5 out of 5. Because yeah, it's fun to use, and yeah, it's great to get multi-kills, but you have to have the correct situation, and it is fun. It does look quite cool though. Anyways, let's move on to the next gold order. For the next gold order, we've got the PPD. Now the PPD is again, it's a light machine. It's actually another submachine gun, but it looks like a light machine gun. Especially especially with this, it's actually more like it's kind of like a dinner plate. It's got the dinner plate of like the DP and the DT. So yeah, in terms of effectiveness, probably about a 3.5. It's got a good drum. It's got a good amount of ammo, but it has a long reload time, and a quick fire rate. So not really the best in terms of this. The fire rate kind of lets it down. So does its long reload time. However, in terms of viability, it's a lot more viable than the PDM, than the PDM, whatever it was. Like I said, when I was discussing the viability, on that weapon, I was pretty much mentioning the PPD indirectly with this. Well, when I said there was another gold order or another thing, but the PPD, this PPD, I would say it's got a viability of probably about the same viability as the PPD, probably about in Moscow, probably about a 2, a little bit more. But I'd say it has a 3 in Berlin, because with Berlin, you don't get the drum mag until level 20, which is actually quite surprising. So you don't get something to outclass it until level 20, whereas in Moscow, you get the PPD with the drum mag at like level 11. Which is kind of really does hurt its viability in Moscow. And yeah, for the fun factor, it's a Soviet SMG, so probably around a 3 again. Not really. I mean, you can't really. The Soviet SMGs are effective, but they're not fun to use. If you know what I mean, they're effective. You've got some enjoyment out of them, but they're not incredibly fun to use. Anyways, let's move on to the next weapon. Next, we've got the Nagant, the suppressed Nagant. Oh boy, oh boy. Well, what do I have to say? I've already put this as one of the worst weapons in the game. I put this as the second worst weapon in the game. So let's just get out of it. Effectiveness 0 out of 10. It's not effective in the slightest. Viability 0 out of 10. The Nagant is better. The actual Nagant is better than this. It's not viable to use it over any other pistol in the game. And next we have the fun factor, and I don't even think it has that either, because it's just basically a worse version of the Nagant. Now, I'm gonna have to give this a 1 actually. I'm gonna give this a 1 out of 5, because yeah, killing someone with the Nagant is funny, but killing someone with a suppressed Nagant will probably be even funnier. But with the Nagant, it's got a kind of a charm to it. With this, it doesn't really have that charm, which is why it's coming in as, just why it's coming in with only a 1 rating. So yeah, that was actually only a 1 out of 15, surprising or not. So yeah, let's move on to the next weapon. I don't have to go far with the next weapon. It's the Mosin Sniper. Now, the Mosin Sniper is very, very bad. I'm just gonna have to say it is very bad. Let's just get the obvious one out of the way. First off, effectiveness 0 out of 10. This is a really bad. It's basically you take a pretty bad sniper as is, because I don't really like the Mosin M1918 that much. So you take a pretty bad sniper, and then you cut its leg off by making the shots, slower. It's got a higher muzzle velocity, and it just feels. It doesn't even have the cool feel that a sniper has. Usability, viability? User viability, definitely a 0. Again, every other sniper rifle is better than this. It's probably the worst sniper in the game. I mean, even Major McDonald had put it as his worst sniper, so it's not even viable. And in terms of having fun with it, I can't even see a reason to have fun with it. The Nagant's got the meme, stuff like the Nagant and the Berdan have the meme factor behind them, but this gold order just does not have the fun factor that other pretty bad gold orders have. So, I'm going to give it another 0. Wow. It's got a complete 0, 0, 0. Yeah. This thing is one of the worst weapons in the game. Anyways, let's go on to the next gold order. And I believe this one's going to be the last one for the Allies in Moscow, if I recall correctly. Yeah, it is. It is the KBP-135, which is actually kind of weird, because the KBP-135 is, you know, you can't actually find this. Like, we were actually, when we were doing some research for Major McDonald's video, he actually was when he was doing that, he was asking people to look for it, and none of us could find it. Like, we were literally Googling this shit, and we couldn't find it at all. So, let's have a look at this. Effectiveness, effectiveness, I'd give it a 3. It's okay. It's serviceable, but it's not as good as other, it's not as good as other, you know, it's not as good as other SMGs. And, because that's the thing, it's an SMG, because this is in, it's in all of the Soviet campaigns. In terms of effectiveness, though, and not effectiveness, in terms of viability, yeah, this is a complete 0. No reason to pick this at all, unfortunately. The PPD 3438 is just much better than this, and it's a better SMG. And the and also there's no comparison to the PPS. The PPS is just too good. Yeah, so, and in terms of fun, I mean, I'd probably give this one a 2. It's fine. It's a fine weapon, but yeah, it's just kind of more, it's kind of straight there. It's like, it's fun to use, you know, you can use it for a little bit. It can be entertaining to use, but I think this should not be an assaulter weapon. This should be, at the minimum, this should be a rifleman weapon. If it was a rifleman weapon, then it would probably go up a little bit more. Other than that, it's just a mess of machine gun, and the problem with it mostly is that it's locked in semi-auto. If this was full auto, or again, like I said, could be used by pretty much everyone, then it could be useful. But as of right now, no. It's kind of got the same problem that the AVT has in Stalingrad, that the AVT can only be used by assaulters, and they already have unlocked the PPSH by the time they get the AVT, so the AVT is not used at all. Anyways, let's move on to the next thing, which is actually in Soviet Berlin, which is actually not Soviet Berlin, in Axis Berlin, and not Berlin, Moscow. I'm tired. I don't know what the hell it was. And then starting off with Axis Moscow this time, making sure I got this right. We've got the Gewehr 1888. Now the 1888 is again, it was another one of the original weapons. So let's start. In terms of effectiveness, I'd give it a 3. It's a bolt action, pretty effective bolt action. It's maxed out, so it's got the effectiveness of that. But yeah, it's just a bolt action. It was adapted, as you can see, it was adapted in response to the Lisle Rifle. And yeah, in terms of viability, though, I'd probably give it a 2, maybe even a 3. It's just, again, 2 or 3, we'll say 2.5 for this one. It's, you know, I mean, it's basically a bolt action again, so, I mean, yeah, it's a maxed out bolt action, but it's not hard to get maxed out bolt actions, especially in Moscow. Like, you could just use the Gewehr, I mean, the 3340 you can max out quite quickly, and even other stuff like the VZ is pretty good as well. And for fun, again, I'd probably say 2. It's a bolt action, and it does its job. Yeah, not the best. It's not an exciting weapon, but hey, it wasn't really meant to be an exciting weapon. Anyways, let's move on to the next gold order. Now, the next gold order I've already got, so I'm going to have to switch over to these guys. It's the Suomi KP26. Now, honestly, let's start with this. Effectiveness, 100% a 5 out of 5. This thing is so fucking good. This is actually a really good SMG. It's got no recoil. It does a lot of damage. And it has a good rate of fire. And it has a good magazine. And a good reload time. It is very effective. For viability, again, 5 out of 5. I think the only thing that really can come close to it is the Korali 39M. And even then, good luck. This thing is so good. It is what... I'm honestly in love with this thing. It is so good. And in terms of fun factor, 5 out of 5 again. Perfect score. I would argue this is the best gold order in the game. The Suomi KP26 is brilliant. This thing just obliterates. It is, honestly, it's probably the best SMG for the Axis in Moscow. It's probably the best SMG in Moscow. I think this thing is about as good as a PPSH. This thing is about as good as a PPSH. It's really good, got a good rate of fire, and it has no recoil. And it has good sights as well. It has good sights. There's a lot of things to have fun with this weapon, which is why it's coming in with a solid 15. I love this weapon, and if you haven't got this and you're playing Moscow Axis, this should be the first thing you get. This thing outclasses the MP28, the MP38, and the MP40. It even beats the really good MP35. Anyways, let's move on to the next gold order. The next gold order is actually the MKB, which is unlocked in all of the campaigns. Now, the MKB is a weird one. So, it's got the similar problems. It has almost the exact same problem as the whatever it was, the KBP, whatever the hell it was. The Soviet one, which was similar also. But it has many of the problems fixed of it. So, in terms of effectiveness, I'll give this a 4 out of 10. I'll give this a 4 out of 5. It's pretty effective. It's a good workhorse weapon. It's a submachine gun, but I would say it's probably better than some of the since some weapons in the campaigns. It's got good hit power, pretty good recoil, and it has select fire. In terms of viability, though, this one's kind of weird. It really depends on the campaign. For Moscow, I'm going to give this one a 5. For Normandy, I'm giving this one a 3. And for Berlin, I'm giving this one a 4. Now, the reason I'm giving it a 3 in Normandy is because Normandy get access to some pretty good SMGs which counter this much sooner than they do in other campaigns. I mean, they get the MP43 sooner than they do in Berlin. But for Moscow, again, this is a pretty good, viable SMG. This thing beats the MP28. It's about as good as the MP40 and the MP34. Really, it only really kind of flounders when you get to the later stuff, like the MP35 and the Korali. But even then, it's good. It's just solid. Berlin has kind of the same thing with Normandy, only some of its later unlocks. It's unlocked to a little bit later. As for fun, I'd probably give this about a 2. It's maybe a 3. It's fun to use. It's basically got the exact same thing. It's effective. So yeah, fun to use, effective, and it's very and surprisingly quite viable. Seriously, I think when I was doing the test run, I actually was surprised how decent it was. So yeah, it's actually decently viable. Anyways, let's move on to the next unlock. The next gold order. The next gold order is the EMP 1926, which is a gold order in both Moscow and Tunisia. And honestly, I think, like like the some other ones, it doesn't really change much on the campaign. So let's start with effectiveness. 5 out of 5, 100%. This thing is a very good SMG. It's a very good SMG. It's got a good drum mag, and it's good to really just have. It's a good SMG. It beats pretty much everything, and yeah, really good SMG. In terms of viability, again, 5 out of 5. It beats pretty much everything in Moscow, other than maybe the Kurali. There's only one thing which actually beats it, in my opinion, which is the Suomi KP, but that's another gold order, and let's face it, they're both pretty good, and really, that's just apples and pears at the end of the day. Like, I would say the Suomi is just, I don't know, they're both brilliant, and in terms of fun factor, 5 again. Another perfect 15 out of 15, and we're going to say this goes on both campaigns it's on. This goes in both Tunisia and Moscow. In almost every campaign it's on, this thing just dominates, and it's just a lot of fun to use. Honestly, yeah, this one's probably the second one I'd pick up. Like, if you have a choice between, if you're playing Moscow, I'd pick this up second. If you're playing Tunisia, pick this up first. This is probably the first gold order to pick up in Tunisia, which is why it's coming in at another perfect 15. We've got a few perfect 15s here, 2 perfect 15s, and we haven't even gotten to Normandy yet. Yeah, the Axis actually have a really good gold order collection. Anyways, let's move on to the next gold order. And we're back to the suppressed weapons again, and this one we've got the Czech pistol, the CZVC-27. Let's just start with it. It's on all campaigns, and I think this is going to be shared across all campaigns. In terms of effectiveness, probably about a 3. It's a pistol. It's an effective pistol, semi-auto, pretty much just going to be, you pull it out, if you're out of ammo, you just pull one out, and it's pretty good. For viability, I'm probably going to give it about a 2. Again, it's viable. It's a suppressed pistol at the end of the day, so yeah. And it's pretty good to pull out in a pinch. I would say it's pretty comparable to a Volfa PP or a P38. You just pull them out in a pinch. They're pretty good. And for fun, it's a pistol. You don't really have much fun with pistols. You just pull them out if you need to. Pretty good, but yeah. It's a good pistol, and honestly, you can use this in any campaign. I'd say this is all shared across all 5 campaigns, because pistols are basically universal across all campaigns, so yeah. Anyways, let's move on to the next weapon. God, we've got the EMP next. This thing is like the Czech pistol, this thing's on every campaign, so, but this one's actually a little bit different. So, in terms of effectiveness, I'm going to give it a 3 again. Actually, I'm probably going to give it a 4. It's slightly better than most SMGs. It also has the massive suppressor, so yeah. Pretty good, consistent across all campaigns. 3 to 4, I'd say, a 3 out of 4. 3 or 4 out of 5, you know. Pretty decent, but not perfect. In terms of viability, this is actually really interesting, because this is where the thing will literally scale depending on what campaign. For Moscow, I'll probably give this about a 3. It's viable, but there's other things to grab. I would say this thing probably loses its viability around the time you get the MP40, MP35 and stuff like that. And also you've got other really good, honestly, it's not as good as the other 3 SMG, so that's why it's coming in with only a 3 out of 5 in Moscow. For Normandy, definitely more like a 1 out of 5, because yeah, it's viable over something like, say, the Beretta M1918, like the Beretta M1918 or the FNAB, but it's not as good as something like, say, the like the MP40. It's about on par with the MP35, really. Not MP35, MP34. Not as good as the MP35. Berlin, actually, I would say has about a 3 again. But I actually 2.5 because the MP35 is not much earlier than it is in other campaigns. So about a 3 for about a 2.53 in Berlin. So yeah, and Berlin's got another gold order SMG which I'll talk about later. For Tunisia, I'm also going to give it a 1 because of one thing, the Beretta M1. The Beretta M1 is just so good. And also the VMP already, like I mentioned. As for the final campaign, oh boy. The final campaign, which is Stalingrad, probably more like a 4 actually. Maybe, because it really, you get the Korali, I don't think you get the MP35, but you get the Korali, you get the stuff like the MKB a little in the later stage. If you're paying, then this is definitely a no. But if you're not paying, then I'd probably say this is about a 4 in terms of effectiveness. So yeah, a lot of things to get into that. As for the final category and how fun it is, probably about a 3, maybe a 4. It looks fun. It looks funnier than it looks funny to use. So, and it is funny to get a kill with it. So I will say it is funny to use. It is fun. It is funny. It's fun to use. So yeah, probably about a 4 in terms of just how fun it is. So yeah, fun but not really effect. But it really depends on the campaign. Also, since you can get 5 of these, you can transfer them over so you can get multiple of them on other campaigns, which is something I would recommend doing on some of these weapons. Anyways, let's move on to the final weapon of Axis Moscow. And for the Axis, we're saving the worst for last with the Arty Luger. Oh boy. Let's just start with it. Effectiveness, 0 out of 10. It's an SMG pistol, basically. Let me repeat that. It is an SMG pistol. And I don't think most people like that. It's got this big, you're replacing pretty much everything. If you look at what you're replacing, this thing just does not do well. Pistols are not as good as other weapons, and yeah, this thing just kind of suffers. Next you have Viability. Again, another 0 on all campaigns. Just everything counters it. The MP30... you get a really good early SMG to counter this. In Moscow, it's the MP38. In Normandy, it's the MP34. In Berlin, it's the MP40. It's the Beretta M1 what's the campaign? In Tunisia, and it's the MP40 again in Stalingrad. And honestly, why would you pick this? And in terms of fun factor, I'm giving this a 1 on one thing. And that is, when you fire this thing, and now unfortunately I don't think I can show this because the firing range I use doesn't have this. I might have to re-record on another firing range. But the sights will go up and will block your sights when you're aiming down the sight. The receiver will just go up and just block your sights, which is hilarious to see. But yeah, basically this thing just does not do well in most situations, and it is and it's just, it's funny. It's funny when you're firing it, and that's about it. When you're firing it, it's funny. That's all the entertainment you're going to get out of this, and the effectiveness. You'll have a cheap laugh. Anyways, let's move on to Normandy Allies, actually. So we're going over to Normandy. So, starting off with Normandy Allies, we're going to have to start with another timed weapon, the Pedersen Device. Oh, fuck me. I hate this thing so much. Let's start off. Effectiveness, 0. This thing has a good magazine and no recoil, and that's it. But that's combined with a tiny rate of fire. And yeah, viability again. Actually, viability, I'm gonna have to say 2. The reason I'm gonna say actually no 3. I'm gonna give it 3. The reason being is that the Allies don't get an SMG that's actually viable until level 22. So this is probably their actually. Yeah, I would usually say this would probably be about 4 because you'll be at this point you've already done half the campaign. But most other gold orders beat this thing which is why it's only dropping its viability down to 3. In terms of fun though, 0. This thing just sucks. The magazine covers half the sights, even when you're firing from the hip. It has a slow rate of fire. It feels like you're shooting an enemy with a marshmallow. And it's a Springfield, and Springfields suck. Yeah, I hate this thing, so yeah, that's why it's coming. It's only going to have a small. It's got good viability for the early game, but there's other better gold orders for it. And as soon as you get the Sten, don't use this thing ever. The Sten beats this, the Lanchester beats this, the Thompsons definitely beat this, and so do other weapons. Anyways, let's move on to the next gold order. For the next weapon, we've got the M2A1 Carbine. Now, the M2A1 Carbine is okay. In terms of viability, I'm going to give this a 4. It's viable, and it's good. Not viability, in terms of effectiveness, I mean. It's good, and yeah, I would say this thing probably has... It's probably up there, you can use this until, it's pretty viable. It's pretty strong to use, man. It's really good. It's pretty effective. It's an M2 at the end of the day, but you can only use this on assaulters. In terms of viability, I'm going to also give this a 4 again. Pretty good, but again, like I said, I'll probably change it out for a Thompson later down the line. But it's pretty good. Got a good rate of fire, and it's fun to use. And it's also, again, I'm going to give it a 4. Perfect 4 across the board. It's very fun to use because it's an M2 carbine, and the M2 carbine is a really fun weapon to use, and a really good weapon, but I think the problem is that this is just... I think if this was a regular troop order, it would be a perfect 555 across the board. But because it isn't, I'm going to have to compare it to the SMGs, and some SMGs it's not as good as other SMGs, but it's still pretty good. Which is why I'm thinking it's coming in at the... Which is why it's coming in, I think, for just 12. Anyways, let's move on to the next weapon. Funny enough, like the Suomi, I've already got this weapon, but even funnier, I don't have it on Normandy. I have it in Tunisia. It's the Pedersen Rifle. Now, the Pedersen Rifle is funny. Okay, this is just a funny weapon. In terms of effectiveness, I'm going to give this a 5. It is effectively just a solid semi-auto. Really good. Sights are pretty decent as well. The sights are pretty good. It's comparable to something like the Johnson and the Grand. I'd say this is better than the Grand. On par, it's got the... It's what happens if you take a Johnson. So, take a Johnson, but give it the Grand reload. And you've got the Pedersen Rifle. Honestly, and I think that's the best way to look at it. So, that's it in terms of effectiveness. In terms of viability, I'm going to give this a 4 in Normandy and a 5 in Tunisia. The reason being is that Normandy you get the M2... Actually, more like a 3 in Normandy, actually, because I just remembered you get the Grand with the grenade launcher, and you also get the Carbine with the grenade launcher, and, critically, the M2 Carbine as well. The M2 Carbine really just beats this. The Grand is, with the grenade launcher, is just really good. You don't really get this in Tunisia much. You get the number 3 with the rifle grenades, but I would argue that the Pedersen Rifle is better than the number 3. Not as good as the number 4 though. The number 4 is much better than the Pedersen Rifle. And as for fun, I'd give this a 4. Very good, very fun, and it is funny when you fire this for the first time, and then you don't realise what the reload is, and you're aiming down the sights. It is one of the most hilarious things out there. And I remember when I first did it, when I first fired this and I first emptied this magazine out. I actually have it recorded. I believe I've uploaded. As of recording, I haven't uploaded it, but I am planning on uploading it. And I generally forgot what it was, and it actually took me by surprise. But yeah, really good, very good gold order actually, and honestly, worth a buy. It's worth a buy if you got this. If you don't have, if you've got this and you've got the you know, in either game, in either campaign, yeah, it's worth buying this. It's better than the Garand. It's better than the Johnson. So it's the best. It's the best semi-auto in Tunisia, and it's one of the best semi-autos in Normandy. Really, really good at. It's just very good. Anyways, let's move on to the next weapon. Okay, we're back on Normandy with the Hyde Model 35. Now, the Hyde Model 35 is it's another SMG. Now, this one's got the unique dual magazine, which is available on a few weapons. It's got, such as the EMP 44 has it, the MP 40, I think the MP 40-1 also has this as well. So basically, it's got dual magazine. So basically, when you reload one of the magazines just gets clipped back on the side. So you go like that, and then you reload the full magazine, which is pretty good, in my opinion. It's a really good system. It's very fun to use, and yeah. So in terms of effectiveness, I'm gonna give this probably a 4. It's really good, and it's effectively it's about as good as another weapon, which I'm going to mention later. Yeah, it's pretty much just about it's good. It's a good weapon, very solid, and the magazine really makes it. I'm going to give it a 4.5 actually because of that magazine. In terms of viability, another 4. It's pretty much up there with stuff like this. I'd say. Actually, I'm going to give it a 4.5. It's really the only thing that kind of stops this is the is stuff like the Thompson. I forgot what I was saying there, but the M1A1 Thompson and a later M1 Thompson as well are really the only SMGs that beat this, but they're quite far levels, quite far in. The Lanchester is also up there, but I'd say this thing's not as good as the Thompsons. Pretty good SMG though, and it's still pretty viable. In terms of fun, well, think of it like a Thompson. It's a really good It's a Thompson, but it just doesn't have the mag. I'd say it's another 4. Pretty solid actually. A very good, very solid gold order. Unfortunately, it just loses its effect later in the campaign when you unlock the Thompsons, which are just better than it in most ways. So, yeah. Very good gold order. But that's going to go downhill almost straight away. I just realised what the last 3 gold orders were when I was just finishing up the Hyde. Fuck me. The Welrod. I think this is without question the worst pistol in the game. Effectiveness, 0. It's not effective in any situation. Viability, 0. Not viable in any situation. And how about having fun with this thing? You don't have fun with this thing. It doesn't even have the sliver that the Nagant has. This thing is just plain bad. And I've said that this is the worst weapon in the game by far. Anyways, let's just continue with the next weapon. Oh, the M3 Suppressed. Yeah, the M3 Suppressed, it's viability 1. Not viability, effectiveness 1. It's the grease gun. The grease gun is shit, so this is a fully maxed grease gun, so I mean, it has the effectiveness of a fully maxed grease gun. Viability 0. It's basically you're spending extra for a fully maxed grease gun. Fun 0. The grease gun is shit. So really, it's only about it's got the effectiveness of a max level grease gun, which is the worst SMG in this campaign. Yeah. Do I even need to explain why this is only, this is quite low? It's a bad SMG, but yeah, I don't like this at all. So yeah. Anyways, let's move on to the next gold order, which is the final gold order for this campaign for Allies Normandy. Final gold order for Allies Normandy, and unlike Axis, well, basically like all the others, we're saving one of the worst for last: the Smith and Wesson light rifle. Oh boy. Effectiveness 0. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad, and it's semi-auto, got a poor magazine, does poor damage, poor rate of fire, poor everything. And it has a really long reload for some reason. It even looks crap. Viability on both factions 0. This thing can't beat the grease gun. So this thing is worse than the grease gun. So what even, how much do you reckon that this thing's going to be viable in Tunisia, which actually has a good start in SMG? So, yeah, this thing does not get into Tunisia either. So 0 on both sides. And finally, fun. This thing's not fun. It is one of the worst gold orders in the game, and yeah, it's bad. I think this is another 000 weapon. Yeah, it's not good, it's not viable, and it's not even fun to use. It doesn't even have that sliver of oh, this thing's just funny to use. This thing just sucks. Anyways, let's move on to the next weapon, which is actually the first Axis weapon. Coming in for the first weapon in Axis Normandy, we've got the Schmeisser. Now the Schmeisser, it's the Schmeisser, and it's fine. In terms of effectiveness, I'll give this a 2.5, really. It's okay. It's decent. But it's not as good as most other early game SMGs, so yeah. In terms of viability, it's a straight 0. This thing is worse than even the MP34, which is the starting SMG. So, what chance has it of beating even dethroning it can't even dethrone the worst SMG, so it's not even viable. But I will say it's fun to use. I'm gonna give it a 3 for the fun factor. It's good to use. It feels good to use. It's a good weapon. And honestly, yeah, it's good to use and it's fine. It's just fine to use. It's fun to use. It's a fine weapon, but it's not viable. So yeah, if this was in Tunisia or Moscow, then maybe this would be better. But for Normandy, not really much. Anyways, let's move on to the next weapon. Once again, the next weapon is something I've already got. It's the G43 Kurz. Now, the Kurz, let's just get out of the way. It is a very effective weapon. 5 out of 5 effective weapon. Very, very good weapon. It has a 10 hit power. It's got the 3-round burst. The only 3-round burst weapon in the game. And even on semi-auto, it's pretty good. It's pretty good on both semi and 3-round burst. You use it on semi-auto for its precision. Then, when you're going in close for the kill, you activate the 3-round burst, and it does a lot of damage. Viability, definitely 5 on both its campaigns. This thing is one of the best weapons in the game. This thing's better than the FG42. This thing's better than pretty much every other rifle. It's the best rifle select fire weapon in the game. And, yeah. I reckon, yeah, best select fire weapon, easily coming in at as a perfect 5 out of 5. And in terms of fun, yes, it is just good. It's great to use, it's fun to use, and it's just even looks good as well. So you're gonna kick a lot of ass, have fun doing it, and you're gonna look good doing it. It's honestly just a great rifle. Again, if you're playing in either Berlin or if you're playing in Normandy, I'd recommend picking this up. Anyways, let's move on to the next gold order, which is actually the final one in Normandy, surprisingly. Yeah, since we've already talked about the MKB, the suppressed weapons, and the Arty Luger, that just leaves the Irma EMP44. Now, in terms of effectiveness, I'm giving this a 4. I'm giving this a 4. It's great. Honestly, this thing's also in Berlin, so yeah, it's a very effective SMG, and honestly, for the, this is just very good. It's a very good SMG. One of the best in the game. In terms of viability, I'm giving this a 4.5 on both campaigns. It is, again, it's each campaign's best SMG, but the problem is the MP43 exists, and the MP43 beats this thing. I'm sorry. I want to put this as a 5 out of 5, a perfect 15 out of 15 weapon, actually, but unfortunately, the MP43 just beats it. That being said, it's still a fun weapon to use. It's got the dual magazine, like with the Hyde. And, yeah, I mean, it was released in the same update as the Hyde, so yeah. Very fun. It's a fun SMG. It's really effective. And it's very viable until the very late stages of the campaign. So, if you've got 2 of these and you have either Normandy or Berlin to level up, grab 2 of these and then just chuck them into both. Into whatever campaign. Yeah. Really good. Anyways, I'm pretty sure we're done with, we can't say anything about Berlin because all of the other ones were already said, so let's move on to Tunisia. Psych. Yeah. There's one weapon which isn't shared on other campaigns in Berlin. Well, it is shared on other campaigns, but I haven't covered that campaign yet. It's shared on one other campaign, which is Stalingrad, and that is the PPD with the suppressor. Now, the PPD with the suppressor, let's start with this. In terms of effectiveness, 5 out of 5. It's a PPD. It's a PPD 40 with the suppressor. And yeah, you can't go wrong with this. Viability, again, 5. Drum mag. Any drum mag SMG, it just dominates in these campaigns. And fun factor, probably about 5 again, because, again, drum mag, PPSHs, PPDs, anything with a drum mag is a lot of fun. It's just a good weapon, and it's got the suppressor, so you're worried about that, but yeah, fun weapon, not much recoil, has a lot of shots though, so it's got a good rate of fire as well, so pretty good. Anyways, let's move on to Tunisia finally. Now, we're starting off with Tunisia Allies, and I'm going to have to go again to talk about a weapon, I've already bought, which is the BSA Thompson. Now, for the BSA Thompson, in terms of effectiveness, I'm giving this a 4. It's basically like the Hyde, but without the ammo. Basically, think of the Hyde, but without the dual mag. Which, I mean, that's a good way to think of it. It's got the same amount of damage, the same magazine size, and pretty much near good stats. It's a really good SMG, to be honest. In terms of effectiveness, though, I'm going to give it a 2. Because at level 14, you unlock the M1A1 Thompson, which is just much better. M1 Thompson and, of course, M2128 Thompsons are just as good. And then you have the elephant in the room, which is the drum-magged Thompson. So, yeah. And in terms of fun factor, again, it's a Thompson. You cannot go wrong with a Thompson. So I'm giving it a 5. Just on the fact that it's a Thompson. Anyways, let's move on to the next gold order. And once again, it's another unique suppressed weapon. This time, it is Napoleon Total's favourite weapon in the game, the Lisle Carbine. Let's go with this. In terms of effectiveness, 0 out of 10, it's basically you're firing a pistol. It's worse than firing a pistol. It's a bolt action pistol. Kind of like the Welrod, but it actually has the damage. Like the Welrod has a, it'll take about, 3 shots to kill someone? This takes about 2 to 3, so, depending on who's shot. In terms of, just viability, well, let me just go, I haven't been flicking over, but in terms of viability, I would rather have the Enfield, to be honest. So, yeah. No viability for the, so 0 for viability, since basically the Enfield is the first unlock weapon. And in terms of fun factor, I think this is only funny to watch people use. This thing is funny to watch people use, but it's not fun to play. Like, I don't like using this. It's not fun to play with, but it's funny to watch people use. And if you're watching people use this, especially when I think it was during the gun game event, I was watching a lot of people playing the gun game event, mostly Napoleon Total and Golden Tony. And if you're watching, if you've seen a few of Napoleon's later videos with his gun game, when he was using the Lisle, he actually was dying inside on every time he got a map with the Lisle Carbine. He hates this thing so much, and it's funny to see. Anyways, that being said, let's move on to the next weapon, which is actually the final part, which is Tunisia Axis, because both Stalingrad sides have, well, they've got the suppressed weapons, and then they have the semi-autos, which are on every campaign. So yeah. Anyways, let's move on to Tunisia. I mean, Tunisia Axis only have 2, but hey, it's 2 unique ones. First off, we've got the Paveli, the Pastelli, whatever, the spaghetti gun. The spaghetti gun. So, having a look at this, it's a semi-auto Braider weapon. So it has a pretty good hit power. In terms of effectiveness, I'm going to give this a 4. It's pretty effective. It's a good semi-auto. Not as good as the Pedersen Rifle in terms of its ammo, but it's solid. In terms of viability, I'm going to give it again a 4. The ZH beats this out the water, but it's better. It's much better than pretty much every other weapon. Basically it beats every other weapon up to the ZH in terms of its stats. It's got same ammo. It's got same ammo, better damage, same damage really, and it's semi-auto. Really think of this like an early version of the spaghetti gun. Only it can be used as a rifle. Whether that spaghetti gun is other Gewehr, whatever it's called. And yeah, obviously the Gewehr 41, it's kind of like it's meh. The Gewehr 41's a meh weapon, anyways. And in terms of fun factor, probably about a 2 or 3. Again, it's fine. It's a fine weapon. It's just fine. Anyways, let's move on to the final gold order in this. Let's go to the final one. Well, we got to the final gold order, which is the Beretta M1918-30. Well, let's start with the obvious one. In terms of effectiveness, probably about a 2, maybe a 3. It's actually surprisingly effective. Its bayonet's it's actually the best in the game. It's actually got the best bayonet in the game, surprisingly. And yeah, it's fine. It's just it's effective. It does its job, and it's pretty decent in the early game, I guess. In terms of viability, though, I'm only going to give it a 1 because the Beretta M1 is so good. So yeah, it's got that unfortunately, and it's also got the unfortunately that the VPN is also, and also even the EMP Suppressed are just better than it. In terms of fun, though, it's actually surprisingly fun to use. Though, like I've heard a load of people say this is actually the best weapon in the out of arguably the worst gold order weapon set list, which was the new ones, which came with Burning Sky. But yeah, I think that this was You know, this is actually the surprising gem, but it's not the best. It's still decent. And yeah, it's got a decent rate of fire. It's a decent semi-auto. And honestly, it's fun to use. So it's slightly fun to use. Anyways, I think that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments what you guys think. Obviously, of course, I didn't even have to talk about much in Berlin or Stalingrad because, well, I pretty much have already talked about them in Moscow and Normandy. Yeah, let me know what you guys think of this list, and I'll see you guys in the next video.